What's up, YouTube people? So we're going to do an update on the Fossil, the race truck, the first gen, pain in my butt, whatever you want to call it. Thinking about changing the name of this thing to either like uncooperative or I hate you, why did you ever make me a race truck, you fool? Something that expresses this thing's attitude a little bit more. So we went to Gearin about 2 weeks ago, and we were able to cut the converter apart to see what was going on, and we have absolutely found our culprit. So what we found inside the converter when we cut it apart was the sprag in the stator was completely trashed. So what had happened is that sprag had seen too much abuse, and it was long overdue on a rebuild. And it essentially, a sprag, if you're not familiar with what a sprag is, it's a bunch of little roller bearings with little springs, and they have like a ramp that they ride on, and that keeps them freely spinning one way, but then they won't spin the other way. And so this sprag was trashed. So when you applied pressure to it via a spool up, because when you do a spool up, you're applying pressure to the stator, it would get to enough pressure to where it would allow the stator to freewheel, because it would break the sprag. And essentially, you know, it would just roll over and it would just let the stator spin. Well, from what Dave Gearin told us, is that when the stator would freewheel, the stall of the converter would become about 200 RPM tighter than 200 RPM above engine idle speed. So that essentially would make the stall 800-900 RPM stall. So extremely tight, which is exactly why when it would come up on boost and the sprag would fail and the stator would freewheel, it would feel like it locked the converter on me, because the stall was so tight that basically it kind of was. And the reason it would die is because the stall was about 200 RPM higher than the engine idle speed. And then once all that pressure got taken away from it, the sprag would lock back up and it would keep the stator fixed again. It wouldn't spin. So that also explains the intermittentness in it, how sometimes you could do 3 or 4 spool ups, never do it. You could go to the track, the first pass of the day, it might do it. The second one, it might not. It might do it once, you could get off of it, get right back up on the pipe, and it would spool up and you could make the run. The other time, you know, it would fall on its face, it would do its deal, and then you could get back up on the pipe again, it'd fall on its face, do its deal again. So the inconsistencies of it were just sheer luck of if the sprag was going to hold the stator or not. So I was extremely happy to find this and to learn this information from Dave and James, because I had really been pulling my hair out with this thing. I always assumed that, you know, we're not going to find anything. Like, I went up there thinking, we're going to cut this thing apart, we're not going to find anything, I'm going to be back to square one, what is going on with this thing? So I was extremely happy that we found the problem. James had my new converter ready to go, sent it back with me. So like I talked about in the last video, we're doing the 18SS stator, so it's an 18 blade stock stator from another application, and this time they did a spragless converter, so that way this can never happen again. The reason that you build a converter with a sprag is because if you were street driving, if the stator was always fixed and was never able to freewheel, you know, at idle and stuff, it would get hot. So with this truck not being a street truck, not being street driven, it makes way more sense to get away from the sprag and do the spragless to keep this problem from happening again. Now, even if we did put a sprag converter back in it, we know that we could have got a lot of life out of it. We just know that on a spragless converter now, something that you're pushing really hard, something in the 1500 plus horsepower range, 60, 70 passes, you probably need to send that thing back and at least get a clean bill of health of it. So got the transmission back in the truck. So what I did a little filming of that, not putting the transmission in because I have enough content of putting transmissions in, enough information on there. I don't want to bore you guys with it. But what I did film was my exact procedure of what I do anytime I install a new transmission, change a converter, change a valve body, really do anything beyond a service. I went through and explained exactly my setup live, real time. So that's what I'm going to show you all next, and then we'll talk after. So the first thing I do anytime I change a converter, put a new transmission in this thing, do really anything where I mess with the transmission more than just a regular service, get in the computer here in the smart wire, and I'll change my display on here from boost to trans pressure so I can read the line pressure. I like to do that anytime honestly, even when you do the fluid and filter change, sometimes I'll do it just to make sure. It's a good indication of if I have enough fluid in it. And with me running this overfilled, I can actually tell if I have it overfilled enough, because when I run it up on the jack stands here, I can tell if the line pressure is where it needs to be or not, and if it needs more fluid or not. So just something I always check. So just gonna hit send config, and this will change our boost to now it's trans pressure. So now I can fire this thing up and see what the line pressure is while I'm going through the gears and checking to make sure the transmission's good. So I always start off with the shifter in neutral before we start it up, because that's where we're going to be checking the fluid level with. And by the way, I haven't charged this battery since last time we were at the track. a basic function test to make sure that we had everything. We had first, second, third, neutral, reverse, park, and trans brake. I can't really test overdrive because it's the way my smart wire controls it, but if I wanted to, I could go and put it on a switch here and try it, but I know it's good. So now I am going to leave it in neutral. It's about 91 degrees trans temp. I'm going to go out there and start checking the trans fluid, make sure that I got the level right. Turn those off so you can hear me. So trans fluid is still low. I've got 14 quarts in this right now. I can tell by looking at it that right now it's basically at the bottom of where full would be, a little bit below that. So I'm going to stick 2 quarts in this thing, and then I'll fire it back up. The line pressure was good. I seen it made about 208, just, you know, in first gear with the RPMs brought up. But when I shifted it, I could tell that it was a little low on fluid, because with no load on it, it would drop down to around 180. So that's a good indication that probably needs a little bit more fluid. So the reason that I shut it off to add fluid is just because the way my hood stack is. If it's running with the hood up, it's not only is it shaking the crap out of the hood, but it's also putting smoke on the bottom side of the hood, and I don't want to burn the paint off. So I'll stick 2 more quarts in this thing, and then we'll fire it up. I'll run it through the gears again, and then we'll check the fluid level again. Okay, so hopefully the camera will cooperate and won't shake too much. So give you guys a bird's eye view of that trans pressure right there in the center, and you can see what the trans pressure does. And since we've added 2 more quarts to it. So hopefully some of you guys found that helpful or at least entertaining. If I missed anything, of course, like always, drop a comment down in the video here and let me know what you want me to cover more of. Definitely love responding to the comments. I love comment engagement. So that's pretty much good for that. So now what we're gonna do, the next step before, you know, we get to go racing, is I'm gonna do some spool ups. So I need to see where this converter is at in comparison to the old converter. I need to see how it spools compared to the old converter. I need to see what the starting line RPM versus boost is with this converter, because anytime you change a stator, converter, make any sort of stall change, it's gonna directly affect your starting line RPM versus boost. And that's if you're common rail or 12 valve, it doesn't matter. It's going to change that. So I'm going to start by not changing any of the what I call the spool up tune up. I'm going to leave the nitrous coming on in the exact same timing and jet sizes as it was with the 17150 converter, and see, compare the logs to see if this converter is any slower, any faster. Kind of doubt it would be any faster, being that it's probably just a tick tighter. And then I'll make my changes from there. So the next video will be doing spool ups and what we need to do, the procedure of how I perfect is a kind of a term that's not really realistic. I try to perfect spool up as much as possible, the things that I do, and how to change the staging limiter and all that stuff. So stick around for that. That'll be the next video about the truck, and then hopefully soon, fingers crossed, stars and moon align, everything in life works out, we'll get to go race this thing again this year. I'm not planning on doing any more events this year. I made up my mind. We got wrote out of the rules in World Cup. That's a different discussion for a different day. So World Cup's out for this year. This thing has kicked my butt this year, I feel like, and I want to focus whatever time that I have left available to this thing on testing. So the only events per se that I'm going to do are something that I know that I can go and have the possibility of making several runs at, and something that's going to be pretty local. There's a couple Mopar events. The people that put those on, they like the truck. So they usually let me show up and test and tune, per se. So there's one of those in Clay City, September 9th and the 10th. So if everything works out, stars and moon, I'd like to go to that one to make some test passes. My dad really wants to race at that one, so this might not make it, and that way, in order we can work on his car a little bit more so he can go and actually race, because he hasn't raced his car at all this year. So, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how this spool-up testing goes. We have some stuff we need to do to the truck still. Just iron a couple little things out, make sure some things are 100%. It's time to nut and bolt this whole thing again, to go over it, put a wrench on everything, make sure everything's good and safe. So, we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. But that's really the only events, let's say, that I have planned with this thing, is the Clay City Mopar event and the London Mopar event, just because I like those two tracks. I like the people that put those races on. Try to support them when I can, and I know that I can show up there and make a bunch of test passes. So other than that, we will catch you guys on the next video. Like always, appreciate you watching. If you like this stuff that I'm putting out there, you want to stay up to date on this informative stuff or just the fun stuff, whatever, click that subscribe button. If you click that bell icon, that'll notify you anytime I make a new video. I know that my videos just come out at random. That's something that's probably going to change here in the near future. Probably going to go to a 2 set days a week when videos are going to come out, to make it a little bit easier for you guys. Some of the feedback that I've gotten recently on YouTube stuff is that you guys don't really know when it's coming out, so you don't really get to catch it necessarily. And it's, man, there's so much YouTube content out there that it's just so easy for it to get lost. So look for that. Look for me to be notifying you guys of when I'm going to start dropping content more, exact time and dates. So appreciate it, guys, and we will catch you on the next one.